It's similar logic to saying, painters, they create beautiful art that inspires us to see the world in amazing ways. Hitler was a painter, so painters are like Hitler. That's the logic. That's the same kind of logic that's being employed here.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I am your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 272. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week. And those of you returning to visit us, I'm glad you're back. Those of you who are new, welcome aboard. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Today's a little bit different. It's our bi-monthly Clinging to God and Gun show, but Pastor Bennett is not available this week. He's not going to be with us. He is on vacation, much needed and well earned for him and his family. And so I am flying solo today, and I've got a little bit of a rant for you. So before we get into that, I do want to thank the awesome men and women who make this show possible, the members of the Reformation Gun Club. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded, and that means we rely on the monthly and yearly contributions of our members. And this week, I want to give a special shout-out to some awesome people. Eric from Buckeye, Ohio. Frank from Lake City, Michigan. John from Spokane, Washington. Calroy from Boron, California. Tony from Little Elm, Texas. And Vincent from Tulare, California. Thank you all so much for what you do to help keep the show running. I really do appreciate it. Armed Lutheran Radio, as I said, is listener-funded. That means that we don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. This little plug for the Reformation Gun Club is as close as you're going to get to an ad today. For as little as $1 a month, our members get access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content, early access to each week's show, invitations to our monthly online hangouts, access to our cool new website, a new podcast specifically for Reformation Gun Club members, and lots more. It's all available for you at armedlutheran.us/gun club. Stop by, check it out, check out all the benefits and all the exclusive content, and hope you'll join us. Okay, I said I had a little bit of a rant today. I do. This episode got a lot on my mind, and I can tell you right now that I will be, as I record this, looking ahead to Sunday, the day that you're listening. This morning, I will be at church. I will have sought absolution for what I expect in this episode to be repeated violations of the 8th commandment. In the commentary that follows, Democrats are they're suddenly coming to the realization this week that they are in hip deep doo-doo for the re-election chances in 2022. They are gaslighting the nation as hard as they possibly can, and reversing or backtracking or trying to talk their way out of difficult situations, and nobody's buying it at this point. The 8th commandment says, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." Now, we've talked about this many times on the show before. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way. Or as we like to say, as some of the old catechisms will say, put the best construction on everything. But folks, I'm sorry. I just can't. I can't. There is simply no best construction. There's no kindest way to explain the truckloads of crap that this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, and the Democrat Party and their allies in the media have been foisting on us for over a year. Everything from pushing critical race theory to flooding the country with millions of illegals, demonizing the police, silencing dissent, cancel culture, cleansing the military of people who are not sufficiently woke, denouncing America's institutions and all white people as inherently racist, spending money like there's no tomorrow, which is already produced record inflation changes, gaying all the things, pushing the LGBTQ, LMNOP agenda, persecuting people of faith, well, the Christian faith anyway, and gaslighting us like crazy, which, trying to convince us that we're nuts and that everything's fine. There's no kind way to explain their actions. There's no best construction that I can come up with. But just for funsies, let's try it. How about? So this past week, we'll start with the border. They've got a problem with the border because and it's been going on for months now. If you haven't noticed, an unprecedented stream of illegals and detainment camps and kids in cages, and people are outraged. And Vice President Harris was put in charge of the border 3 months ago by the president. She was made the border czar or whatever that means. And she had, until this week, she had not even visited the border. You may recall this little interview on NBC where she was, and I got to applaud the interviewer for asking some tough questions and making her squirm. See if you remember this reply to why she had not, as of yet, visited the border.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe.
So what is the best construction on that? Well, I mean, she's the vice president, right? She's got a lot of stuff to do. She's really busy. She's the vice president. She literally has nothing to do except wait for, God forbid, President Biden to kick the bucket. That's literally the job description. The idea of putting VPs in charge of stuff is a very modern idea. It's not really defined. There's not a defined job for the vice president except to sit around and wait and hope the president doesn't die. So no, there's no best construction on this. She just didn't want to go down there and be photographed in the camps where kids are being held in cages after spending years denouncing the Trump administration for doing the same thing. You can't downplay a crisis. You can't gaslight people and convince them that there's nothing wrong if there are photos of you standing in the middle of it. It would be kind of like you remember the CNN guy, the reporter who was reporting on the quote unquote mostly peaceful protests while an entire city block was literally burning to the ground behind him. It's bad optics. So why did she go to the border this week? Why was it so important that she stop in El Paso? Well, the best construction is that she cares deeply about the crisis at the border. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. The real reason is because President Trump went down there and showed her up. It made her look bad. So she had to rush down there and look like she was doing her job. So why did she go to El Paso? Because there's no crisis in El Paso. There's literally a border wall, and there are no detainment camps in El Paso. Is there a best construction on that? No, I can't find one. This was so she could go down, make a stand around for photo op, so she could say, see, there's no crisis. We've got this thing under control. The truth is, they want the crisis. These people who are coming across the border, even if some percentage are victims of sex trafficking, some are drug runners, some are terrorists, some are truly destitute people who think this is the best way to improve their lot in life, because let's face it, the Biden administration has basically opened the border and said, come on in. The Democrats see these people as future voters. That's the simple explanation. That's why we have the border crisis. They want ultimately to overwhelm this country to the point that we ultimately throw up our hands and we say, well, there's just too many of them here, and they've got families, and it would be heartless to deport them and send them back and break up families. It's not the caring and loving thing to do. So then you make it permanent, and you give them benefits, and then you tell them that the benefits that they're getting are because the president and his party love them. And Republicans are nasty racists who hate them and want to send them back. Then, because after they've been here a while, it would be unfair to have them living here legally and not be able to vote, so you give them a say in the country's elections. This is generational election fixing. It's the long game. Mail-in ballots and ballot harvesting and dead people voting and tampering with the precincts here and there, that's chump change. You want to make sure Democrats are in power for generations, you flood the country with illegals and make them voters. That's all there is to it. There's no best construction there. Now, we've also seen school boards around the country getting shellacked. And this is actually good to see, but what's led to this is not good. These school boards are just getting torched by, not literally torched, but bombarded, not literally, by pissed off students and angry parents for pushing transgender nonsense and Marxist racial theories, namely critical race theory, CRT. Now, why are these school boards mandating critical race theory? What's the best construction there? Well, critical race theory is a way for us to explore and to come to grips with the legacy of racism and slavery in this country, right? Wrong. That's a lie. Critical race theory teaches that all of America, and indeed all Americans except for people of color and certain select old people in the White House, are deeply and irredeemably racist. It's in total stark opposition to Dr. Martin Luther King's dream. It judges people based on the color of their skin. If you're black, you're oppressed, and you're a victim, and you have no chance at success because America is deeply racist. If you're white, you're a racist oppressor. Whether you know it or not, you are. It attempts to shame white people simply for being white. It teaches kids that they are culturally blind if they don't see racial differences. Isn't that exactly the opposite of what Dr. King taught? Of what he dreamed about? If there are disparate outcomes between blacks and whites, whatever it is, economic or social outcomes or things in the justice system, it has to be because of deeply rooted institutional racism, not because of other factors. Racism and race is the lens through which everything is judged in the framework of critical race theory. And if race is the only factor, then there's nothing, you can't solve anything. It only results in division at the end. And that's really the point. It's a perpetual excuse, a perpetual woe is me. If racism is the ultimate reason, then there's no reason to come up with a solution. Just blame Whitey in America so that we can tear down our history and put up statues of drug-addled criminals. Mark my words, there's going to be a George Floyd Elementary School somewhere in America before long, if there isn't already. And this is why you're seeing, and this is great, I love seeing this, black parents, many black parents are speaking out against critical race theory in these board meetings. They don't want their kids to be raised to be taught that they're a victim. They believe, as should we all, in Dr. King's dream. There's no best construction on critical race theory. Imagine this. A school board here in the DFW area actually began publicly smearing parents who opposed their policies on critical race theory, smearing them by name in the media, slandering them because they oppose this racist theory that the school board seems to think is so damned important to teach. What's the best construction on that? In Loudoun, Virginia, this past week, the school board decided they didn't like your First Amendment rights. They closed their meeting because they were receiving criticism for supporting critical race theory, and then they closed the meeting down and declared that the assembled parents were in an unlawful assembly, and 2 parents were arrested. There's no best construction on this. There just isn't. This is simply abuse of power. Authoritarians don't like people opposing them, so they're going to use any means necessary to silence or destroy them. Cabinet members and military leaders are getting raked over the coals in the Senate and in the House over the same idiotic ideas. While Russia and China are beefing up their militaries, ours is teaching soldiers that they should hate their country because it's irredeemably racist, and that inclusion and tolerance and gay pride are what makes the military great. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, who, by the way, was appointed by President Trump because, President Trump hires only the best people. He was in a House Armed Services Committee hearing, and he got his nose bent out of shape because he was supposedly offended that at the assertion that the military is woke, and he defended teaching critical race theory in our military colleges. He said he read Marx and he read Mein Kampf because he wanted to understand those ideologies. So he read Marx and Mein Kampf to understand those ideologies of Marxism and fascism and National Socialism so he could oppose them. Does he oppose the idea that America is racist? No. And he even said as much. He said he wanted to understand white rage and what caused the January 6th Capitol riot. He wanted to understand why people would be upset, why white folks would be angry. And that's why it's important to teach critical race theory, he said. So he read Marx to understand communism so he could effectively fight it. Does he want us to read Ibram X. Kendi so he can understand racist white people so the military can fight against them? That's not very comforting. There's no best construction on teaching our troops who are supposed to be defending America to hate it and to see the citizens that they serve as irredeemable racists. Meanwhile, around the country, we're seeing this alarming spike in violent crime. Following a year of violent protests and riots around the country promoted by Democrats, or at the very least ignored and rationalized by Democrats, violent crime has risen by as much as 25% over last year in many of our major cities. Police have been vilified by Democrats and the media for well over a year and a half. Just this past week, I think it was, the entire Portland Police Crowd Control Unit resigned in protest. Why? Because the Portland City Council and the mayor don't support the police. And Democrats are now smelling the fire that they've lit, and they're scared to death that it's going to burn them in 2022. And it is. So now you have a massive gaslighting campaign by Democrats claiming, oh, no. We love the police. We respect the police. We don't want to defund the police or reduce their roles in fighting crime. No. You've got that all wrong. Mazie Hirono, the senator from Hawaii. Look, there's been a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes in the past year, and even some in the pro-gun community have been very sensitive to anything said negative about people of Asian descent, so don't take this the wrong way. But let's be honest here. Mazie Hirono has an IQ that wouldn't fill a thimble. She is the most vile, ignorant, and moronic person in the Senate, and that's saying something, considering some of the buffoons who walk the halls of that hallowed institution. Senator Mazie Hirono said in an interview this week, no, Democrats don't support defunding the police. No. Yeah, right. Ignore all this stuff that happened in the past year where we called for defunding the police. In June of last year, a year ago, the New York City Council approved a budget that cut the police budget by $1 billion. That's billion with a B, dollars. Out of a $6 billion budget. 1/6 of their budget was cut. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congressperson from New York, tweeted out, defunding police means defunding police. It doesn't mean budget tricks or funny math. This is not a victory. The fight to defund policing continues. Last I checked, AOC is a Democrat. The city of Portland cut police funding, as I mentioned. The city of Portland is run by Democrats. After former President Obama complained publicly that defunding police, the defund police movement was alienating everyday voters, Democrats like Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, the terrorist sympathizer and raving anti-Semite from Minnesota, fired back, saying that defund police isn't a slogan, it's a policy demand. Yeah, Senator Hirono, no Democrats support defunding the police, and most Democrats in national office will say, no, we don't support defunding those racist police. We just think we should divert the funding or spend money more wisely, right? Defer to other priorities. It's the same thing. It allows them to say they support defunding police without saying the words defunding police. So what's the best construction on that? There is none. They're all liars. The Attorney General, Merrick Garland, you remember him? The guy that Democrats desperately wanted to be nominated for the Supreme Court at the end of Obama's second term. He's now the Attorney General, thanks to insufficient opposition by Republicans. He announced last week that the greatest threat to the nation, the greatest threat, not drug cartels or gangs or ISIS, not even climate change, is this.
During President Biden's first week in office, he directed the administration to undertake an assessment of the domestic terrorism threat and then to use that assessment to develop the national strategy being released today. The two most lethal elements of the domestic violence extremist threat are racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists and militia violent extremists.
Really? White supremacist terrorism. And how do you define that? Well, that's why you need critical race theory, because it tells us how to define that. Critical race theory tells us that all whites are racists. So we're all white supremacists at heart. So if you fly a Gadsden flag, or you question the elections, or you vote for Trump, or you believe the crazy notion that the Second Amendment is about defense against tyranny, you're the greatest threat to America. There's no best construction to put on this. So now we come to the President of the United States, barely cogent at this point, rambling, not sure entirely where he is, fighting with the teleprompter because he can't keep up. He made a rambling speech this week about combating the rise in violent crime around the country. See, they now know that the crime issue is going to bite them in 2022. So it's time to do something. It's time to step up and make a stand, get something done. And what's the answer? What do you think? I'll give you 3 guesses. None of them are actually fighting crime.
That means Congress passing sensible gun prevention, violence prevention initiatives is worried. It makes sense. Background checks, ban on assault weapons.
Ah, yes, good old gun control. Same old, tired, worn out policy ideas. And really, that's about it. I mean, he did mention community policing initiatives, which I suppose, in addition to traditional policing, maybe can be effective. You know, get out in the community and get kids involved in positive things and catch them before they get involved in gangs and stuff like that. That's the best construction on community policing, though. But that ignores the last 18 months of Biden, Harris, and the Democrat Party demonizing traditional policing as racist. And to be honest, what community policing actually amounts to is just funneling taxpayer money to teaching cops that they're racists and sending money to BLM and the 1619 Project. That's basically all it is. What is the best construction on this? Well, because we know none of these ideas work, and he keeps suggesting them, which is moronic. So is that the best construction, that he's just a stupid person? That he's just out of his brain and he doesn't have any idea that these things that he's been supporting for 50 years don't work? Or is there another motivation? Because the worst construction is that he knows these ideas don't work and that they only affect the law-abiding. And that's the point. That's the worst construction. He actually knows that this is going to affect the law-abiding. It's going to make it harder for them to arm themselves and protect themselves, and it's going to turn innocent people into criminals and ultimately eliminate your gun rights altogether. Because none of these things is going to work, even if they were to get passed. And when that doesn't have any effect, you got to go further. And that means confiscating guns. So here's how all this stuff ties together. All these, I know I've been ranting about different things. How does crime and the border issue and CRT and the military, how does all this tie in together? There are plenty of reasons to support the Second Amendment, and this week we saw a lot of them. You've got authoritarian government pushing radical ideas and policies, silencing dissent and shutting down debate. You've got a military that's cleansing its ranks of wrongthink and brainwashing its soldiers to see everyday Americans and America in general as racist and evil. You have a military that's simultaneously working to wokeify itself, celebrating wokeness and weakness and deviancy rather than toughness and traditional patriotism. And at the same time, our enemies are emboldened. Rising crime that politicians refuse to address and police are prevented from handling. And now a federal law enforcement agency focusing on you, dissenters. And then there's this.
Those who say the blood of patriots, and all this stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government. Well, the tree of liberty is not water with the blood of patriots. What's happened is that there never been, if you wanted to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons.
If you don't own a gun and never really thought about owning one, this statement and everything that happened in the past week should really make you want to jump up, run to the gun store, and buy as many as you can get your hands on. The President of the United States glibly suggested that those musty old sentiments from the Declaration of Independence, you remember those? The ones about throwing off oppressive government, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. Those immortal words from our Declaration of Independence, you remember those from civics class? Do they even teach civics class anymore? Probably not. Well, your right to stand up to an oppressive government, that right that the founders established in our founding documents because they did it, they actually stood up to an oppressive government, that doesn't matter anymore because the government has nukes. Is that really how this works, Mr. President? Really? You peons, sit down, be quiet, stop asking questions, wear your mask, get vaxxed, show us your papers, give us your guns, you bunch of racists, or we'll bomb your cities. Well, not cities. That's where their voters are. We'll bomb your suburbs, your farms, your ranches, your towns. This lame brain and his party think democracy was on the verge of being lost because of some unarmed lunatics in face paint and MAGA hats on January 6th. At the same time, you having a rifle is not enough to stop the government because the government has nukes. And at the same time, nobody needs rifles because they're weapons of war and they're dangerous. The logical inconsistency of those three positions simultaneously held by Democrats is astounding. But I digress. And you may laugh off this idiotic quip by the president about F-15s and nukes, because if push comes to shove, right, this is what we've been telling ourselves. If push comes to shove, the military would never turn on the American people, right? Right? Tell me I'm right. I'm pretty sure that the Russian people and Vietnamese and the Chinese and Cambodians and Germans thought the same thing at one point as well. The rulers of those nations at various times successfully convinced their citizens that some of their fellow citizens, their neighbors, were the dreaded other, subversives, traitors, a danger to the nation, enemies of the revolution, enemies of the state. And they used their military and police powers against their own citizens while their neighbors watched on in horror or went along with it. The Biden-Harris administration is busy wokeifying the military and cleansing it of people with traditional views of country and patriotism. They're busy othering people who disagree with them. They want to disarm them, not for their safety, not for your safety, because if they wanted to protect you, you think they disarmed the criminals. But no, it's you, the everyday American gun owner, that is the problem. It's you and your darn guns. Because you don't need 30 or 50 or 100 rounds to hunt a deer. And sadly, I honestly believe that if asked to drop a bomb on a rural American town because they were told that the inhabitants of that town were racists or white supremacists or militiamen or Proud Boys or Trump voters or conservatives or Christians, I honestly believe there's a certain segment of America that would happily push the button. I have no doubt at all. And those are the kind of people that the military and our intelligence services are actively trying to recruit. As I recite this rant, some of you will quote Romans 13 and say, we're supposed to submit ourselves to the governing authorities. This is what St. Paul tells us. This is what the Bible teaches us. But submission must be for the sake of the gospel, not just because some socialist wants to run your life. President Biden-Harris half repeated this quote. You heard it just a moment ago about the blood of patriots. You might do well to remember that was written by one of the founders, Thomas Jefferson. And that's not all he wrote. That's only part of the quote. The tree of liberty, Jefferson wrote, must be refreshed from time to time not only with the blood of patriots, but also with the blood of tyrants. Are we headed that direction? Is there a best construction to put on the mess this nation is in? Let me know your thoughts. Visit our feedback page. Leave us a comment. armedlutheran.us/feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue. All right, that's enough ranting from me today. Next week, we'll have another of our variety shows with content from the entire cast, including Pastor Bennett. I have a pontification that he left me right before he went on vacation. And we've got new tips from Sergeant Bill and from Mia Anstein. So look forward to that next week in episode 273. Until I talk to you again next week, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.